green highlights of federal law and state law. I've given you sort of the order that's going to go along with them. All right, now before we delve into the different exact ones, there's a broader theme I want to talk about. And this is back to our million laws that we're breaking down, okay? So, within this idea of categorizing law, we have civil and criminal, substantive and procedural. But we also have federal and state, okay? So let me explain what I mean by that. Again, we're breaking laws down. So, we are a federal republic. That's the way our system is set up. We are a federal form of government. Federal form of government. Does you know what that means? Okay, I'll explain. Now here at the bottom, I've got this little illustration. You know what that is? That's an umbrella. I know. You tell I was an art major. Should love art, but I have no artistic talent whatsoever. Wish I did. But we are a federal form of government. Now, what a federal form of government means is, well, I'll just give you an example. The United States of America. United States. That's the clue. And the idea of a federal form of government is you have lower level governments, in our case, a state. State of Oregon, Idaho, California, Massachusetts, whatever, right? You have 50 states. So each state has its own government. It has its own form of government. Each state can write its own laws that apply within that state. Each state has a court system. Each state has an executive branch, a governor, or whatever the name of the chief executive is for that state. So every state actually could be its own sovereign nation, its own country. But the idea of a federal form of government is that the lower level governments, the states, have agreed to form a higher level, that is, an umbrella government. And the idea is that there are some functions of government that, number one, are more efficient if you have one overriding umbrella type of government, and then leave the other type of issues to the states. So for example, the US dollar. It's more efficient to have one currency for all of the states than to have each state have their own currency. So that way you don't have exchange rates between states and all that. That's why they came up with the euro and the European Union, same idea. So the idea of a federal form of government is each state agrees to give up or transfer some of the authority or power that they would otherwise have as a sovereign to a higher level government. And in our case, it would be the government of the United States of America, or what we call the federal government. So the idea of a federal system is we have one higher level form of government, that is the United States, and then we have lower level governments, state, and then we also have counties and cities and on down the line. So like an umbrella. Now, we'll talk more about this in detail in a few moments, but the idea of a federal form of government is that the higher level government will have the authority to write law that governs and applies within all of the states. So federal law is like an umbrella that covers all of the states. The states can still write laws, but if they conflict with the federal law controls. So minimum wage is a great example. Every state can set their own minimum wage, but it has to be at least the level of federal minimum wage. You can go higher, like Oregon is higher than federal, but you can't go below. So federal law will establish a basement, a floor, a foundation, whatever you want to call it. And then state law can add to that, but can't go below. So it's like a baseline, so to speak. And we'll get into that off and on throughout the term. So when we talk about breaking down our laws into various categories, if we have a million laws, we can break it down into criminal and civil, procedural, substantive, but we can break it down further from there. We're going to have both federal and state. Okay, so we have then federal civil substantive law, federal civil procedural law. Actually, it's called the FRCP, the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. That's a whole course you got to take in law school for a whole year. 5-hour course. Same thing with criminal, or excuse me, civil, state. State civil substantive, state civil or criminal or civil procedure, sorry. Got what I was at. Same thing with criminal. So we have federal criminal substantive law, that is federal crimes, and we have federal criminal procedural law. State criminal substantive law, state crimes, state criminal procedural law, what happens in the state courts, all right? So that's what we do. We look at, okay, does federal law apply? And I will tell you, most of the time, if you're looking for an answer to a legal question, you should start with state law. You want to start with the lowest level law and work your way up. Because usually, a lower level law like state law will provide you with an answer for what at least your initial obligations are. And then you can look at what federal law might apply as well. So most of the time, state law is going to be where we're focused on, depending on what's going on, okay? Depending on the type of case. All right, so back to this. Oops. All right. So back to the idea of what's going on in this page. Number one, it's just the names of the laws. Number two, it's giving you an idea of what are the authority levels of the various laws. With the first fundamental concept being federal law is a higher level than state law. And I'll show you why in just a moment. Now, there's another thing going on here. That's my little diagram right here. You know what that is? Again, play Pictionary. That's a funnel. That's horrible, but so what's the idea of a funnel? The idea of a funnel is you start off with a large opening and you want to direct liquid or whatever into a smaller area. So you work your way down. Well, law is the same way. Typically speaking, the higher level law, the more broad coverage that law will have. Also, the higher the level of the law, the less detailed the law will be. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. That's the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, right? So I read that. How many decibels can I play my amplifier during a parade? Is it going to tell me that in that sentence? No. So I'm going to have to look elsewhere on my funnel to find out, okay, can I have my amplifier cranked up to 11 at 200 decibels? Which would break your eardrums, basically. I'm going to have to look for some lower level law, and that'll probably be an administrative rule that tells me the maximum volume I can have my amplifier during a parade or other public event, or private event for that matter. All right? So I call this the funnel effect. And we see the same idea in the court system. You got to start at a lower level court and work your way up. Same thing with law. You have higher level law, just like a funnel, applies to a broad group of people or area. The U.S. Constitution applies throughout the United States, and in some cases outside the U.S. even, but it's not very detailed. So as you work your way down, the law becomes more detailed, more targeted, but also applies to a smaller group of people or geographical area or whatever, and sometimes down to literally microscopic detail, depending on what we're talking about. And I'll show you some examples of that as we work our way through. All right, so let's talk about this fundamental principle of federal and state law some more, because there's a fundamental concept I want you to know, and that's called the concept of federal supremacy. Federal supremacy. So let me show you what I mean. Page 8. Actually, might be page 7. Okay? Yeah, page 7. Okay, federal supremacy in the doctrine of preemption. I want you to know this page and what this basic concept is. This is a fundamental concept of the United States legal system at both federal level, state level, city level, county level. Okay? This is our poker game. So to begin with, let's go down here. This is a cut and paste I made of the U.S. Constitution, Article 6, paragraph 2. This Constitution, the United States Constitution, and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties of which shall be made under the authority of the United States, and I put this in all caps and bold, shall be the supreme law of the land. And the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, and anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. So that paragraph 2 of Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution has a name. Something clause. You know what it is? The something clause, not Santa Claus. That was a joke. The Supremacy Clause, okay? The Supremacy Clause, right here. So, I want you to know that term Supremacy Clause and what it means, and where it comes from. So this is the idea, again back to the concept of the federal government, that the states could each be their own sovereign, but they have agreed through the U.S. Constitution, that's the agreement, the document, that creates the federal government. And within that document, it says that the federal law, the law of the United States, is supreme or of a higher authority than a state law. And therefore, if a state law conflicts with a federal law, under the Supremacy Clause right here, the federal law will beat the state law. So federal law will always beat out state law. And the reason for that is the idea of a federal government to begin with. That is, the states give up some of the powers they otherwise would have. Those powers that they don't expressly give to the federal government, they reserve under the 10th Amendment. And the idea is that the federal law will be supreme and override state law. That's the whole concept. So again, back to minimum wage. If Oregon established a minimum wage of $5 per hour, and federal law says it's got to be $7.25 an hour minimum, federal law controls and beats out that Oregon law that conflicts. Okay? Or if Oregon law passed a law that says you can never have a parade ever, no matter what the circumstances are, that would violate the First Amendment right to peaceably assemble, and therefore that Oregon law would be overridden. We call that preempted by the U.S. Constitution. So, this concept of supremacy, here's what I want you to know. These 4 ideas. Number 1, what does supremacy mean? Supremacy means higher level, lower level. Higher level will beat the lower level. That's poker. And when that occurs, one of the terms we use is preemption, the doctrine of preemption. Now, this term preemption has a couple of other meanings, which I don't want to go into here, but basically the idea of preemption is, the word preempt means to override. So like if you're watching TV, this happened to me once I was watching a football game, and they broke into the middle of the game just as one team was getting ready to score a touchdown. We preempt this to bring you an emergency broadcast, practice. Now, you guys have all heard that when they do the beep, and this is an emergency broadcast. We preempt this television show or the radio program to bring you an emergency